Welcome back to Blender Daily. Today I am going to demonstrate how to use rigid bodies in Blender, and we are going to create this nice simulation of domino bricks falling over. This is a video aimed at beginners. Therefore, I try to keep it simple and explain everything step by step, so you should be able to follow along with me even if you aren't experienced in 3D. Let's get started. Okay, so let's start off with a fresh Blender file. And first of all, let me delete this lamp and the camera. So just select them and press X to delete. We're gonna keep the cube as we're gonna use it to create our first domino stone. So in order to do so, let's first bring it up. So G set and type in 1 on your keyboard to move it up by 1 unit, so that it is placed perfectly on the ground. Then let's make it a bit slimmer, so S and Y to scale it on the Y axis to make it really thin. Then let's also scale it on the X axis, SX. And here we already have the rough shape of our domino brick. I don't like those sharp corners, so let's make them a bit smoother with a bevel. So with the object selected, go to the modifiers tab, click on add modifiers and select the bevel modifier. And now you can see that not all the bevels on all the corners have the same size. Whenever this happens to you, this usually means that you haven't applied the scale of your object. So we can quickly fix this by just selecting this cube, then press Ctrl A. And here we have this apply menu and just choose apply scale. And now the bevel should be the same on all edges. It is a bit too big, however. So let's just bring down this amount value to make this bevel really small. And now it is still really sharp. So let's make it a bit smoother by increasing the number of segments to, let's say, 4 or 5. Then we can also right click on our object and choose shade smooth to make those corners really smooth. And I'm pretty happy with this result. And that's already our first domino brick. Now I also want to give them a material, and it's going to be a wood material. So whenever I need materials for objects in Blender, I like to go to polyhaven.com, which is a great website where you can get free HDRIs, textures, and already finished 3D models. The stuff on this website are all extremely high quality, so I really like to use them. In this case, we are going to use a texture, so go to Browse Textures. And for the domino brick, I want to make it wooden, so I'm just going to select this plywood material. In order to download it, go up here, select a resolution. In this case, I think 2K is enough. Also make sure that you have the blend file selected and then just click on download in order to download it. I already have this in my folder right here, the plywood 2K. And whenever you download the material from polyhaven.com, you get a folder with all the textures. In this case, it is just a diffuse texture and a roughness texture. Now we could individually import those textures into Blender and create a material with that. However, the cool thing about Polyhaven is that they also provide a finish.blend file where the complete material is already included. So we can use this when we go back into Blender, get this folder, and just drag and drop this .blend file into Blender. Click Append, go to Material, and here we have this plywood material. Just select it and click Append, and now we have this material imported into our scene. And in order to see the materials on our object, we first need to switch to the viewport shading mode. And currently this is all white, which is because we haven't applied the material to our object yet. So in order to do this, switch to the material properties. Don't click on new because we don't want to create a new material. Instead, just open up this drop down menu and select the plywood material. And now we already have this material on our object, which is extremely handy, and I really like to use this method. So yeah, that's basically it for our domino brick. Let's also add a ground plane where our bricks are going to be placed on. So I'm going to press Shift A and under Mesh bring in a new plane. I want to scale it up a bit, so it's S to scale it up, then S and Y to scale it even more on the Y axis. Maybe also GY to bring this plane over here a bit. And whenever you scale objects in object mode, which we are now, it is important to apply the scale afterwards to avoid any issues with the shading or with materials. So in order to do this, just press Ctrl A with the object selected and apply the scale. Then let's also import a material for this ground plane. So I'm going back to polyhaven.com, and this time I want to use this wood table texture. Again, use the same settings to download it. I already have it in my folder right here. It is the wood table material. So let's jump back into Blender. I'm gonna take this blend file, drag and drop it in here. Material, select the wood table material, append it. And when I now select this ground plane, again go to the material properties and select the wood table material in the drop down menu. And that's how easy it is to import those materials to our objects. Now in this case you can see that the texture is a bit distorted. This is because we haven't properly UV unwrapped it yet. So in order to do this, switch from object mode to edit mode. Press A to make sure that everything is selected, and then U to open up the UV unwrapping menu. Just click on unwrap, and now we should have gotten rid of the distortion and our ground plane looks a lot better. Okay, so I think we are ready to add the other iterations of our domino brick. So we are just going to add duplicates of this one that we already have. So in order to do so, just use the shortcut Shift D to duplicate it. And then just after that, I want to press Y to constrain it to the Y axis. Then I move it over here a bit. I think that should be around the same distance. Okay, so once you have this done, you can use the shortcut Shift R to quickly repeat the last action and make a few more duplicates. I think this is already enough. And we are ready to start with our physics simulation. So to do so, let's first select the first cube. Go to the physics properties and enable rigid body. So as soon as we click this, we have physics enabled for this object. And when I play this timeline, you can see that it is just falling down. Now I don't want it to fall through this ground plane. So I'm also going to enable rigid body for this ground plane so that they can collide. However, when I now play the timeline, you can see that just both of them are falling down. So if you want to prevent this plane from falling down, you just have to change the rigid body type from active to passive. And when we now play the timeline, you can see that this brick isn't falling through anymore. However, I don't want it to just stand here. Instead, I want it to fall over. So I'm just going to press R and X to slightly rotate it on the X axis. Make sure that you are on the first frame when rotating, otherwise you won't be able to transform the object. Then press play, and you can see that now this stone is falling over. Okay, so our first brick is working. Now we just need to do the same for all the others. We could go through them and manually enable the rigid bodies for them. However, if we had, let's imagine, a few hundred of those bricks, this would be very laborious and not really effective. So instead, we can just select all of them that we want to apply the rigid bodies to, then hold down Shift and left click on the brick that already has the rigid bodies enabled. And now we can copy those rigid body settings from our active objects to all the others that we have selected. To do so, go up to Object, Rigid Body, and choose Copy from Active. And if you now take a look at them, you can see that all of them have the rigid body simulation enabled. And when I play the timeline, they are all falling down one after another. And yeah, so I think everything is working. Let's take a look at it once more. And I'm pretty happy with this simulation. Now we don't need all the 250 frames, so just go to frame 120 and set this at the end frame. So we only have the frames that we really need. And next, let's also bake this simulation so that Blender doesn't have to recalculate it every time we play the timeline. For this, just go to the Scene Properties, and on the Rigid Body World, go to Cache. Again, set the end frame to 120, and just click on Bake. So now this simulation is saved to memory. Let's take a quick break right here to talk about the sponsor of this episode. If you are a beginner in Blender, you might be thinking about upgrading your PC to get better performance when doing 3D work. Thanks to Renderro, this might not be necessary. They offer extremely powerful cloud computers that can be accessed from anywhere. I've already used their service for some of my projects, and I can honestly say that I'm really happy with it. If you are interested, you might want to check out my car VFX tutorial that I recorded entirely on one of their virtual machines. Or just visit renderro.com for more information. The link is in the video description. But now, let's get back to our tutorial. Okay, so let's bring in a camera so we can actually render this animation. So press Shift A and select the camera. Then place the view wherever you want to have the camera. So for me, this is gonna be about here. Then press Ctrl, Alt and numpad 0 to place the camera to the current view. And I also want to go to the camera properties and just bring down the focal length a bit to, let's say, 40 millimeters, so we can see a bit more. Okay, then I also want to animate the camera, so I go to around frame 10. With the camera still selected, I press I and add in a location keyframe. Then I scrub through the timeline to the point where the last frame is the last brick is falling over. Then with the camera selected, GY to move over here. Press I again and add in another location keyframe. And when we now play the timeline, you can see that the camera is following those bricks that are falling over. Okay, so that's great. And let's also scale up this ground plane a bit with the shortcut S. And I don't like this gray background, so let's add something in there as well. So I'm gonna press Shift A and under Mesh bring in a new plane. Then R and Y to rotate it 90 degrees along the Y axis. GX to bring it back here. And let's scale it up a bit. SY to scale it on the Y axis. Let's bring it over here. Then tab into edit mode. So you can either use the tab key to quickly switch between edit mode and object mode, or you can change it up here as well. So now let's go to edit mode, switch to edge selection. Select this edge over here and then press E and X to extrude this edge over here. So now we have this corner in the background. When we go back into object mode and press 0 on the numpad, we get back into the camera view. And we now have this plane in the background instead of just this boring gray background. However, I don't want to keep it just white, so we're also gonna go back to polyhaven.com and search a texture for it. I want to go to the plaster and concrete section, and I think I use this white plaster texture. So again, download it. You could also use any other texture that you prefer. Then I think I have this right here, the white plaster texture. Then go back into Blender, drag and drop it in here, append, material, select it, append again. Then select this background wall, go to the material properties and select the white plaster from the drop-down menu. Now it works on this side, however, the side over here is distorted. This is because we haven't properly UV unwrapped it yet, so we need to do this. And before we do any UV unwrapping, I want to apply the scale as well, so I press Shift A, apply scale, then switch back to edit mode, press A to select everything, and U to unwrap. And now this texture is correctly projected on our background plane. And we have this in here. However, I think it is a bit too big. I mean the texture. So let's go to this corner up here until the cursor becomes this cross, and then drag to open up a new window. We want to switch this window to the shader editor. And if you have the wall selected, you can now see here all the nodes for this background plane. We are only interested in this mapping node, and if we change those scale values, you can see that we can adjust the scale of our background. And in this case, I think a value of around 3 should give us good results. Okay, so that's basically it. So let's prepare this scene for rendering. So once we switch to the render preview, you can see that it becomes really dark, which is because we don't have any lights in here yet. And in the render properties, I also want to switch the render engine from cycles to Eevee. You might already be in Eevee, just make sure that you switch it to Eevee if you were in cycles before. And for the lighting of the scene, we are going to use an HDRI texture. Can also get them from polyhaven.com right here, and HDRIs are basically 360-degree textures that we can wrap around our scene in Blender and use it to light our objects and get accurate reflections. So you can see that this is the HDRI that I'm going to use, which is basically just a 360-degree panorama image. So again, just download it. I use the 4K version. Then go into Blender, and in order to import this to our scene, go to the world properties. Click on this yellow button next to color. Select environment texture. First of all, first everything becomes pink. This doesn't matter, just click on open. Go to where you saved the HDR. Select it, open image. And now you can see that we have this in the background and our objects are properly lit. Then press 0 on the numpad again to go back into the camera view. And we can improve our scene even more by adjusting a few render settings. So first of all, I want to enable ambient occlusion, which will give us those contact shadows of the stones on the ground. And I also want to enable screen space reflections, which will give us reflections on this table and make it look just a bit better. Okay, so now we are ready to render. So just select a random frame, switch to the rendering tab, go up here, render and render image to test it out. And in this case, everything is working perfectly. So let's render out our animation. For this, switch to the output properties. First of all, select the folder where you want to save the animation. Give it a file name. In this case, I'm just gonna call it Domino. Accept. Then I want to switch the file format from PNG to FFmpeg video, so that we get an actual video file. Then change the container from Matroska to MPEG-4, so we get an MP4 file as an output. And also the quality, bring it up to perceptually lossless, which gives better results. Once you have everything set up, you can just go to render and choose render animation, which should render out all the 120 frames and combine them into an MP4 file. This should be fairly quick, since we are rendering this with Eevee. You can see I'm already on frame 22. That's it for this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it interesting and you were able to follow along with me. I am Nick from Blender Daily. See you in the next one.